My name is Carissa. I am the artist at Wandering Acres, and this is my spring retreat box tutorial. We're going to be making watercolor tulips for the spring box. This is my first time making a tutorial, so bear with me. I'm going to try to walk through the steps as best as I can. In your box you should have the paper and the colors red, yellow, and blue. We'll be able to mix every color we need out of these. A few other things that you might want: a pencil, a paintbrush. In the file, the retreat guide, there's a recommendation of what brush I recommend, but you can use any paintbrush you have. Steal one from your kids. Go to the Dollar Tree and just buy one. The quality of the paintbrush doesn't really matter with watercolor. It's so flexible. So we're here to have fun. We're not here to make a masterpiece. Playing with watercolor is almost a meditative experience, and I want you to have fun with this. I want this to be fun and learning something, but also being able to kind of get in that art flow state of mind and create and connect, and yeah. Also, you're going to need something to mix your colors on. You can use, so this is what I use. This is a butcher's tray. You can go and buy one of these if you want to. If you plan on doing a lot more painting, I really recommend it. Otherwise, you can use this as a Rubbermaid lid. I've used colored ones before. A plate. Any of those will work. White is best so that you can see what colors you're making, but like this clear one, I'm going to be using it, you'll see it in the video later, over a white sheet of paper so that the colors are really nice and clear. So, with all that said, let's get started. So to get started, in your kit you should have plenty of pieces of paper, so grab one, but you can make this as many times as you want, make whatever variations on it, try something new. There's all sorts of different things, but what we're going to be walking through right now is tulips. And here are two different versions of it that I made. There's so much you can play around with it. I'll show some of the different things that I did with each one of these to give you an idea of how to make it your own. But to get started, we're just going to grab that pencil and do a little bit of sketching. So when you're painting or creating any form of art, you usually want to work in odd numbers. Something about odd numbers are just more pleasant to our eyes. That said, make as many flowers as you want. If you want 2 flowers, if you want 4 flowers, if you want 1 flower, whatever sounds good to you, go ahead and go with that. So I'm going to do 3. I like 3. It leaves, they're not too small, they're not too big. You're going to want to just draw ovals. Nothing fancy. Quick ovals. Keep them light if you can. I like to alternate them. Do them towards the top, like the top 2/3. You want to leave room for some leaves and branches and stuff like that, because we don't really have much else to put up here unless you want to. That, and then sketch in some stalks coming down. If you want to, you can sketch out where some leaves might go. And that is your basic tulip design. And from there you can go in a little bit more. Tulips, so the way I do them in this one, you can kind of see there's this one center petal on the flower. That's what it is. And then there's 2 on either side, and then there's petals on the other side. So you can sketch these in if you want. If you want to get some tulips, look at those. While you sketch them out, if drawing's your thing, get into detail. If drawing's not your thing, ovals work. We can go from there. You know, these are your tulips. They can look abstract, they can look realistic, they can look like whatever you want them to be. But that just kind of gives you an idea for the layout. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is you are going to need a cup of water too. I like mason jars, but you can use coffee mugs, anything that will hold a decent amount of water. So to get started, You're gonna want to get your paintbrush wet. So these paints are watercolor paints. They are professional grade paints, Winsor & Newton, and they're already dried, so all we have to do is add some water to get that pigment up. Pick out the color for the flowers that you want. I obviously like the pinks and reds, but I mean, you can make them purple, yellow, green, blue, rainbow, whatever color you want to go with. I'm gonna go with pink for this one. And so we're gonna grab some of the red, and when you add water, it just kind of rehydrates the color. And I like to get the color nice and rehydrated before I use it. And when you need more water, grab more water. If you have too much water, you'll want some sort of a cloth. You can use paper towel, you can use a rag, whatever works for you, so that you can dab off some of that extra water. But I'm gonna use this straight pink color. I love this pink red color, but if you want to mix a color, grab the color and mix it over here so that you can keep this one pure. Because if you're making some sort of like purple color with the blue and the red, and then you want just red later, it's gonna be really hard to get it back to just that red color. So there's a couple different ways. I'll do a different technique on each flower. You can go in with the water and just add, oh, this water is a little bit pink because I had some left. I didn't clean off my brush fully, but go in and add the water before you add the paint. So what I'm doing is I'm doing that center petal, side petal, and a side petal. And then you go in and you grab as much pigment as you can. And with watercolor, what you're doing is you're going from water, you don't use white. Water is your white. So you are just getting as much pigment as you can and diluting it with water if you want it to be lighter than that. The paper is your water. So I'm gonna grab a bunch of pigment, and you can just dab it into the water and let the water kind of play with it. And it's gonna run it around. It's going to slowly move through the water, and you can get some really cool textures this way. But it's going to, when it dries, it's going to be much less vibrant than that one is. So you might want to go in later and add some more color, but then while it's still wet, I'm going to come in and grab some of this yellow. Doing the same thing, grabbing water, wetting the paint till I get some, and I'm going to dab some of that in the bottom, and you can swirl it up through it, add as much or as little as you want. I just like having that gradient change, the different colors work through there. So that's one way. The other way is to just go in with the paint and not add any water, to just go in and go, this is my center leaf, this is the top of that leaf, the top of that leaf. I'm gonna clean out my brush really well and then wipe it off on here so it's dried off a little bit, because I just want a little bit of water. If you have too much water, you can make a huge mess. If you don't have enough water, then you're not going to be able to get the paint down. So it's finding the right balance of water. Then I'm just going to kind of spread this down. And then grab some of this yellow. And once I touch it to there, it's going to kind of play. So here are the two different ways of doing that. That's the first layer of that. I'm going to really quickly do this next flower. Just play with it though if you want to do different flowers. Whoop. See, I didn't clean off my brush properly, so now there's red in my yellow, and it's going to be very hard to get that yellow back. I forget, it's something I do all the time. Yellow down here. You could do them half and half. You can do all one color, you could do each flower a different color, whatever you feel like. One thing that's really important is that if you paint it, it's probably somewhere out there in nature, because there are so many crazy textures and colors and combinations that you don't see until you're looking for it. And once you start painting, a lot of times you'll start looking for them and you'll start noticing them. Okay. So now at this point, those flowers need to dry, because anything else that I do is going to get into that water and do the same thing that I did when I brought the paint in. It's going to bleed out, whether the color goes out this way, you know, out into the stems, or whether the stem color comes up into there. So we're going to need to let this dry. But at this point, we can do some funky things with texture. You can drop water in, and when you do that, it's going to push all of the pigment out, and you'll get this really cool texture around it. So you can play with textures that way. Dropping in paint drops. You can get, if you want to get some salt, I always have some salt on my painting table, and the salt will also bring cool textures in. I'm going to do that on this one up here. I don't remember the science behind this, something about the salt soaking up liquid and pigment or something like that, but that is how I got some of the textures in this flower. And so this is why you have 4 sheets of paper, I think maybe 6, I'm not good with numbers, I don't remember how many there are, but that's why you have so many sheets of paper. Try different things. Try adding the drops of water, salt, whatever things seem fun to you. Those are just a couple of the ideas. So now we are going to let this dry and come back and finish off the flowers and do the stems. Okay. So we're back. These have all had a little bit of time to dry, and I can show you a couple things. First off, this one is still very wet, so we're not going to touch that one for a little while. However, you can see some of the textures that are coming in from where extra water's been added, and you can see the jagged edge around this one is because there was too much water in that. So, I mean, that's beautiful. That's a whole style in of itself, but if you don't like it, you can take a little bit of extra water and a little bit of the color if you want, and bring that in and kind of just go over it, and you're going to lift up those edges, those dark edges, and just kind of add in a little bit of color, smooth it out. The wonderful thing about watercolor is if there's something you don't like, you can lift the color out of it to a point. So you can go in with water and kind of scrub to get that line out, because I didn't want that line there. And then you can go in with a dry brush that you've cleaned off very well, and you can actually lift up the water, that pigmented water, to lighten it. So if there's ever a dark spot that you don't like, you can lighten it that way. Alright, so on these two, because they are dry, I'm going to go in and do those back petals. If you can see, that shape of the flower goes out past the center petal that I made. So we're going to grab a little bit more, and we're going to just bring in some more. Now you can make that one whole petal. You could have one petal here and one petal there. Kind of leave a little shape, but that kind of rounds it out. And if you want to, you can bring it all the way in like that, or you can do it so, like for this one, because it's wet, I don't want those colors to touch. I am just going to leave a white space between so that it can't bleed through and change everything. Alright, now that those are done, and these are dry enough that we can start on the stems. So for those, I'm going to get this blue nice and wet. Once I have some color going up that, I'm going to grab some and bring it over here for mixing. I mean, you can even pick this up and like get some really good color going in there. And then with a clean brush, so I don't bring blue into the yellow, I'm going to grab some yellow and I'm going to go in and start making my green. And that's a pretty good green off the bat, but I like it. I'm going to add a little more blue. Again, a clean brush with plenty of water to bring in here. And you can see how that darkens up that green right away. And play around with it. There's all sorts of different shades of green. Like, there's not one right green color. Go in and grab some more yellow. Just kind of play around. So I have kind of a yellow green. You can do a blue green. I mean, if you add a little red, it will make it more brown, which I will do later just to show you, but I'm going to add even more yellow. I want a nice yellow green for the light part of that. That just screams more springy to me. So once you have a color you like, go in and remember those stem lines that we had. Ooh, that's almost too yellow. That's like olive green. Well, I'm just gonna go grab some blue, bring that in there, and add some of that green in here. Just making up our own colors, and they don't have to be perfect. Here I touched the green to the bottom of this wet flower, so that green is gonna start to spread up into the flower, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's happened in this one, and you can see it pulled it all the way up through the petal, and that's funky and it's cool, and I love how it did that. One of my favorite parts about watercolor is that you can just kind of let it do its own thing. It doesn't have to be about being perfect. It doesn't have to be about, you know, exact detail. It's letting the water play with the color. It's a form of letting go, and that does not come easily to me. I am a bit type A, a bit of a control freak when it comes to art usually, and learning to embrace that with watercolor is freeing and important and applicable in so many other areas of life. Okay, so now that I have those stems in, I'm going to do the leaves, and tulip leaves tend to be big and flat. And what you can do is, when you're using a paintbrush, you can do thin lines with the tip of it, or if you press it down more, you can make them go thicker. So I'm going to grab some more. Actually, I'm going to have to make this color deeper. So when you want a darker color, it just means you need more color. So same amount of water, a lot of blue. And then same thing with the yellow. Hopefully that gets me a nice, there, that's better. So I'm just going to do some leaves. You could do as many leaves as you want. You could have some leaves going back through here. I think we'll do some of that. Branch it up. In this one, you can see I did some grass too, so you can do little, there again with the tip of the brush, just doing little flicks, as opposed to the leaves, which is pressing down harder, flattens out the paintbrush. Grass gives it kind of a base, a ground that the flower is growing out of. Although this is very short tulip stems from what I remember. Tulips aren't coming up here yet, so I have not seen a whole lot of them, but from what I remember from last year, these stems are a little short, but it gives it it grounds it and gives it a base. So while these are still wet, you can add in more colors if you want to darken it up. You can make a much darker blue-green. Go in and add touches of that. Whether you want to add shadows at the bases of the stems or along the leaves where it's wet, that will blend in really nicely, and where it's dry, it'll have a much sharper line. So you can kind of play with that. I'm doing a couple dark green through here, and I think I like that. It's really fun. I can always go in once it dries and add more detail, and I might do that, but we'll just kind of see. This flower is all the way done, so I'm gonna go back in, and this time I'm gonna get a really dark red. Grabbing water and just mixing and mixing and mixing to get as much of the pigment as you can onto your brush. And then I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do these shadows where adding some definition to the leaves. And there's going to be all sorts of, there might be lines, it might be, some of those tulips have like stripes. You could be adding the stripes to it. Here, this is the shadows for like the center of the tulip. For me, that's what I envision it. And then some lines for the petals definition. But you can go in and add, you know, lines through here. And when you want those thin lines, it's just a really light stroke. If you want, use a piece of practice paper. Here's another paper. At any point while this is drying or beforehand, you can always grab some practice paper and just practice thin lines and thick lines. Or different shapes and how you can play with the thin and the thick. For how you want to do that, you can practice, whoops, grab some water, practice adding water to an edge and blending it out. Sometimes it's really handy to have scraps of paper on the side to be able to practice the different techniques on, so that you don't have to commit to the paper right away for your actual finished painting. So here I have my tulips. Once these are dry, I'll go back and do the same thing that I did on this one, just because I really like how those darker details pop. To really make a painting pop, you want to have a balance of light and dark. And if it's all light colors like this one, it's pretty. It's nothing that makes you go, wow. You can see I even messed up. That's why this is one of my previous ones. But it's very flat. There's nothing that really pops or stands out about it. And when you compare it to this, there's these light tones in places in the leaves and the flowers, but then that darkness is what really makes it pop. So play around with it. You can make really dark flowers. So after all this, there's still a few different ways you can play with it and make it yours. So in this one, what I did is I splattered it. So to show you how to do that, I do this when I'm not super happy with elements of a painting and I just want to have fun. So you want to get a really nice wet brush and whatever color. So I'm going to grab blue since these were red. Grab blue. And then this is how I splatter it. And you want to make sure it's very wet so that there's actual paint and to come off of it. And then you just hit it on your finger and you can see those splatters. Blue is probably not the best color for this one, but that just stands out so you can really see how it works. You can see the red splatters in here. I've seen rainbow splatters. It can be a really neat effect to add to a painting. It is messy, as you can see. It went all over this, so if you want to do it in your bathtub or in your sink somewhere it's easy to clean up. Watercolor paints clean up really easily. So just not as easily from paper. But I can show you how to pick something up, like these blue dots up here that you can see. I hope you can see those. So I'm just gonna grab, because they're really wet, I'm gonna go in with a dry brush and pick up as much as I can, but there's still this little smudge of blue. So I'm gonna go in with some nice clear water on a clean brush. I'm just gonna do that, rub that water around, pick up as much of the pigment, so that little bit of pigment that was left is now in all this water. Dry my brush off really good, and then I'm just gonna pick it up. And it's like it never happened. Obviously this is not possible for everything. Once the paint dries, it starts to set in, and sometimes you can't get it up. I've tried, and it just is not coming up. But it's a great way if you did something and you don't like it and you want to change it. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper. There's more paper. Try it again, try something new with it, and that's what I'm gonna do on this one. So I have, these are some of my favorite pens. I have this pen, and one way you can do is, it's called like a line and wash. If you have a painting and you're not a huge fan of it, which I've had plenty like that, sometimes it can be fun to go in and, oh, this pen is actually running out of ink. So let me grab a different one. Grab a pen and you add some outlines. You can add some shading, outline leaves, and you make it kind of, it makes it a sort of sketchbook style, and it works really well in this one because the colors are so light, so the lines really stand out. You can even add leaves that aren't there, other things that you might want. And you can go back in and paint over this. The paint will pick up some of the pigment from the pens, but that can be a really fun way to just play around a little bit more, bring a different element to the piece. So we have the line and wash. We have the splatters, which are so much fun. If you have kids, get them in aprons that you can get paint on, go somewhere where you can make a mess and just do this. It is so much fun. We made curtains like that for my son once. They had a blast. And then we have the salt, different textures, different colors you can play with. There's so many different ways to play with art in general, but especially watercolor, and the way it encourages you to just let go and let that water do its thing. You can use different size brushes. So here are two sizes that I use. And this one I use for really big paintings. This one really requires you to let it go. They're all different sizes. So just figuring out what works best for you and what you want to do, but you don't need a tiny brush to do details, because if you have a round brush that comes to a point, you can get those thin lines. Like here I'm going to, these leaves are dry now, so I can make some even darker colors to come in and add little detail. Like here I'm going to add some darkness right underneath the flower, because that would be in shadow. If the sun was coming from somewhere above them, that would be in shadow. So just add a little bit of that. And add those dark, I can make these nice and thin. Like these thin blades of grass. Need a little more blue. Or I can make them nice and thick. Just depends what I'm looking for and what I want to do. And if sometimes it's not going to work how you want it to, and that's perfectly fine. That is part of watercolor. It's the learning experience. It's the play, the fun, the... Oh, I don't even know. I don't know that I can find the right word for it. It's hard to explain. I'm going to grab some more in here and go and do some of these details in this one. I don't know that this one is even going to dry. That can be the problem with adding too much water. It can take so long to dry. Finding that balance between water and pigment is probably the hardest part of watercolor and what you will work so much on. And once you got that, you can do anything because it finally will be working how you want it to work. But so here we go. So much fun. You should have plenty of paper in your kit to try this a few times. If it dries and you don't like it, you can always use the other side. There is a preferred side on watercolor paper. However, my preference is kind of up to you. One side's rougher and one side's smoother, and the paint and the water are going to play differently on those different sides of paper. And whichever you like better, I work with the rough side, but if you use the smooth side and it works for you, that's great. If you're getting really frustrated with the painting, it just might not be the side of the paper for you. But you will figure that out with practice and doing it over and over again as you learn how much water and what side of the paper and all those sorts of different things. Once it's all dry, you can erase the pencil marks. You can leave the pencil marks in. If you don't like the pencil marks, you don't have to make them on your next one. It is harder to erase pencil marks from underneath where the paint is. So some of those marks still might show. But that can add a really neat element to it as well. I think it adds character and it adds a loose, artsy, sketchy sort of feeling to it. These can be great for cards. Write a note on the back, put it on the front of a card. These sheets are 5x7, so they should fit in 5x7 frames. If you want to frame it, gift it, or just create art, I just create it for the fun of creating it. I give my kids my paintings sometimes. They love them, they cherish them. They ruin them very fast. They've colored on them, chewed on them, but they love them. And you know, that's what making art is about. It's not about lasting forever necessarily. I've seen people donate their paintings to old folks' home because they have so many and they don't need them anymore. Hospitals, all sorts of different things. So I hope you enjoyed this. I would love to see your paintings. If you create some, tag me on Instagram, tag me on Facebook at Wandering Acres Art. I'd love to see what you're creating, the colors you use, the fun you're having. I hope this is great. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. I would love to help. This is, as I said, my first tutorial, so if I missed something, if something didn't make sense, let me know, and I will do better next time. I'll answer your question, and I'll do better next time. So we're both learning something new here. So I hope you had fun with this, and I hope you have fun with the rest of your retreat box.